The night was supposed to be just another one of those lonely evenings at the top of the world. In a penthouse, high above the city lights, Miles Anderson sat staring out of his floor-to-ceiling windows. At 42, he had built a billion-dollar empire, but he couldn't shake the hollow feeling inside. He had everything anyone could ever dream of: money, power, success. But what good was it when he had no one to share it with? Miles was sterile, and that fact had haunted him since he was in his 20s. He couldn't have children, and the thought of passing down his legacy, of having a family, seemed like a distant, unreachable dream. But life, as it always does, has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. One phone call, one change, and everything Miles thought he knew about his future was thrown into complete chaos. Enter Maya Johnson, a beautiful, strong, and determined Black woman who had 3 children under the age of 3. Maya was a whirlwind of energy, balancing her responsibilities as a mother with her drive to make a life for herself. She wasn't rich, nor did she care about the luxuries that people like Miles had. All she cared about was giving her children the best she could offer, no matter how hard it got. She had her own struggles, her own battles, but when she got the call, she never expected how it would change the course of her life forever. It all began when Maya decided to take a leap of faith and explore a family connection she never knew existed. A birth certificate, just a simple piece of paper, was all it took to unravel a mystery that had been buried for years. The document had been tucked away, locked in a dusty old box, forgotten in the attic for decades. But when Maya discovered it, it led her to a shocking revelation that would send ripples across her life and into the world of the richest man in the city. The birth certificate revealed that her triplets, who she had always thought were just the children of an anonymous donor, were in fact the biological children of none other than Miles Anderson himself. The news hit her like a ton of bricks. She couldn't wrap her head around it. How could this be? Miles, the billionaire with everything at his fingertips, was the father of her children, and she hadn't known. For Miles, it was a completely different reaction. When Maya reached out to him, he thought it was a scam or a prank. He never imagined the woman on the other end of the line would be holding a piece of paper that proved his biological connection to children he had never met. The thought of having children, his children, seemed impossible, and yet, here they were. The truth came crashing down like a tidal wave, and nothing in his life would ever be the same. Maya's voice was full of confusion and disbelief when she called him. She wanted answers, and she had every right to. But Miles, still processing the shock, didn't know what to say. What did this mean for him? What did this mean for Maya? And most importantly, what did it mean for the children? Miles had never been involved in their lives, never once seen their faces, yet here he was, connected to them by blood in a way he couldn't ignore. As the two spoke, it became clear that this was no ordinary case of an absent father. There were layers to the story, mysteries that neither of them were prepared to confront. Why had the birth certificate been hidden all these years? Why had no one told Maya that the father of her children was a billionaire? And what did Miles's family have to do with all of this? Questions raced through both their minds, but neither had the answers. Maya was left standing at the edge of something she didn't know if she was ready for. She wasn't looking for a rich man to swoop in and solve her problems. She had done it all herself, from sleepless nights to putting food on the table for her triplets. But this was something different. She had no choice but to face it. The truth had been laid bare, and now she had to figure out what to do with it. For Miles, the discovery was a punch to the gut. He had lived his life with everything he needed, but now, in the blink of an eye, he had a new responsibility that he never expected. 3 children, his children. How could he reconcile this truth with his own history, his own past? Could he step into their lives? Would they even want him to? And if they did, What kind of father could he be, having spent his entire adult life detached from any notion of fatherhood? The stakes were high for both of them. For Maya, it was the chance to understand her past and create a future for her children that was more than just survival. For Miles, it was the opportunity to embrace a reality he had never thought possible, to discover a new side of himself that had been hidden away for far too long. But the road ahead was anything but simple. There were so many complications, so many questions that had yet to be answered. The truth had come to light, but it was only the beginning of a much bigger story. The next steps for both Maya and Miles seemed unclear. As the phone call ended, neither knew what would come next. Would Miles accept his newfound role as a father, or would he retreat into the world he had always known? Would Maya try to bring him into her life, or would she keep her children's father at arm's length? And what about the triplets? How would they react when they finally met the man who was supposed to be their father? The tension was palpable, and the only thing that was certain was that nothing would ever be the same. The revelation of the birth certificate had opened a door to a new world, one that both of them would have to navigate carefully. What would it mean for Miles's empire? What would it mean for Maya's family? And how would the lives of these children be forever changed? You'll have to stay tuned to find out what happens next. The story isn't over yet, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when these two worlds collide in ways no one could have predicted. Days passed after that phone call, and the weight of it all began to sink in for both Maya and Miles. Neither of them knew exactly how to move forward, and yet, they both knew they couldn't simply ignore what had been uncovered. The more they thought about it, the more questions piled up, each one leading to a deeper level of uncertainty. Miles found himself pacing through his luxurious penthouse, staring at the city below, but his mind was elsewhere, focused on a life he never thought he'd be part of. He had always been distant from the idea of family. His work had consumed him for so long, and the idea of children, his children, was something that had always felt impossible, a part of his life that he had never even considered. But now, everything was different. Those kids were real, and they were his. The thought of actually meeting them terrified him. What would they think of him? Would they resent him for not being there? Would he even be able to connect with them? He had always been a man who valued control over his business, his life, everything. But now, with these three children suddenly in the picture, he felt like he was losing his grip on everything. Maya, on the other hand, found herself struggling with her own set of emotions. At first, she had thought about how this could change her life, how the presence of a wealthy man in her children's life could provide them with opportunities she couldn't even dream of. She had always worked so hard, juggling her job and raising her triplets with love, but it was a constant challenge. There were times when she could barely make ends meet. Having someone like Miles involved could change everything for her children, but deep down, she knew that wasn't the reason she wanted him to be a part of their lives. What she really wanted was for him to take responsibility, to make the effort to be a real father, not just someone who threw money at the problem. As the days turned into a week, Maya wrestled with herself. She had grown up in a community where family meant everything. She had seen firsthand how the absence of a father figure could tear a family apart, and she wasn't about to let that happen to her children. She had worked so hard to give them stability, love, and care, but she couldn't do it alone forever. Still, could she really trust someone like Miles, who had spent most of his life insulated from the kind of struggle she had known? Could he understand the depths of what it meant to raise 3 kids on her own? Meanwhile, Miles couldn't shake the feeling that his world was on the verge of unraveling. He spent his nights going over every detail, every possibility, trying to figure out what role he could play in these children's lives. But there was one thing that he couldn't ignore: his family. He had been raised by a father who had always told him that family wasn't just blood, it was loyalty and responsibility. And yet, he had been living in a way that contradicted everything his father had taught him. Now, with the Triplets' birth certificate in his hands, he couldn't escape the feeling that he was being called to something greater. He thought about his parents, how they would react to this situation. His father, especially, would be furious. He had always been proud of Miles's ability to build an empire, to be self-made, but the idea of a sudden, unexpected family connection would be seen as a failure to live up to the Anderson name. His father had always wanted him to be the perfect image of success, and this wasn't part of the plan. But Miles couldn't help but wonder, was he supposed to give up everything just to satisfy his family's expectations? Or was this the opportunity to step up and change the course of his own legacy? With each passing day, the tension mounted. Maya reached out to Miles once more, hoping to find some clarity. She arranged a meeting, unsure of what to expect. When they finally sat down face to face, it was nothing like she had imagined. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic moment of reconciliation. Instead, they found themselves sitting in a quiet cafe, both unsure of where to begin. Miles was the first to speak. His voice was steady, but there was a hint of hesitation that hadn't been there before. "I've been thinking a lot about this, Maya. About everything." He looked at her, his eyes searching for something. "But I need to know. What do you want from me?" Maya didn't answer right away. She could feel the weight of his question hanging in the air. What did she want from him? The truth was, she wasn't sure. She wasn't looking for a paycheck, not really. She needed him to be present, to show up for her children, to be the father they deserved. But what did that mean? And could she really trust him after all this time? "I want you to step up, Miles," Maya finally said, her voice soft but firm. "I want you to be part of their lives. I don't need your money. I need you to be a father." Miles swallowed hard. The words hit him like a punch in the gut. He had always thought of himself as someone who could control everything. But this was different. He didn't have all the answers, and he wasn't sure if he was ready to give up the life he had built. But in that moment, he realized something. He couldn't just walk away. He couldn't just ignore the fact that these children were his, flesh and blood. "I don't know how to do this," Miles admitted, his voice quieter now. "I've never been a father. I've never had to be." Maya looked at him, her eyes softening. "Neither have I," she said. "But we can figure it out together, for them." The words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, everything seemed to pause. It was as if the weight of the decision finally sank in for both of them. There was no turning back now. The past was behind them, and the future, whatever it held, was just beginning. But one thing was clear: the road ahead would be anything but easy. Miles walked away from that meeting feeling a strange mix of fear and determination. He didn't know what he was doing, but something inside him told him it was worth the risk. For the first time in his life, he was truly about to step into uncharted territory. But Maya wasn't sure if she could fully trust him yet. She wanted to believe him, but there were too many uncertainties, too many risks. And the children? They were her first priority. She couldn't afford to let them get hurt. Would Miles truly keep his word? Or would this just be another failed attempt at something he wasn't ready for? The clock was ticking, and the answers they both needed were just beyond their reach. The only thing they knew for sure was that they were about to embark on a journey neither of them had planned for, and it was going to change everything. Days after their meeting felt like a whirlwind for both Maya and Miles. It was like they were both walking on a tightrope, each step uncertain, each move carrying more weight than the last. But as much as they tried to prepare themselves for what was to come, nothing could have prepared them for the true test that was fast approaching. Maya had tried to keep her focus on her children, but she couldn't help but wonder if she was making a mistake. She wanted to believe that Miles could change, that he could step into the role of a father and offer her children something she could never provide on her own. But there were days when doubt crept in, especially when she saw how much he was still wrapped up in his own world. She would catch him slipping into the old habits, checking his phone, staring off into space, as if his mind was elsewhere. And each time, it would remind her of what she feared most, that he wasn't really ready for this. For Miles, the struggle was different. He knew that he had to be present for Maya and her children, but every day felt like a battle. He had spent so many years building a life that was all about him, his empire, his success. And now, he was being asked to build something new, something he couldn't control. Every interaction with Maya and her children felt like he was stepping into unfamiliar territory, unsure of how to navigate it. And there was always the nagging voice in the back of his head asking, "What if I fail them?" The tension finally reached its breaking point one afternoon. Maya had invited him to spend time with the triplets. Nothing formal, just a few hours at the park. It was meant to be a casual meeting, a chance for Miles to get to know them better. But it didn't go as planned. The moment Miles arrived, the children immediately ran to him, their faces filled with excitement. It was a small, simple moment, but for Maya, it was a wake-up call. She watched as Miles awkwardly bent down to meet the children's eye level, his hands unsure as they reached out to take theirs. For a moment, she thought he might not be able to do it. But then, something changed. Miles looked at the kids, their bright, trusting eyes, and he smiled. It wasn't the confident smile of a successful businessman, but a genuine, almost relieved smile, one that said, "I can do this." He reached out and picked up one of the triplets, cradling them carefully in his arms as if he had done it 1,000 times before. Maya stood frozen, watching him. For the first time, she saw not the billionaire businessman, but a man who was trying, truly trying, to make things work. Her heart softened, but the doubt still lingered. Could this moment last? Was this really the change she had hoped for? Or was it just a fleeting attempt? As the afternoon went on, the triplets laughed, played, and tugged at Miles's hands, drawing him further into their world. It wasn't perfect. There were moments of hesitation, moments when Miles seemed to pull back, but something was shifting between them. And just as Maya was beginning to let herself believe, just as she was starting to think that maybe this could work, everything changed in a split second. One of the triplets, a little girl named Zoe, tripped and fell. It wasn't serious, just a scraped knee, but it was enough to send Maya rushing over. She knelt beside Zoe, whispering comforting words, wiping away her tears. Miles stood there for a moment, watching, unsure of how to respond. He hesitated, then stepped forward, his voice shaky. "Let me help," he said softly. Maya paused, glancing up at him. For the first time, she saw the sincerity in his eyes, the real concern for her child. He wasn't just a businessman who could throw money at a problem. He was genuinely invested in being there. She handed Zoe over to him, and Miles, with a tenderness she hadn't expected, carefully checked the scrape, holding Zoe close as if she were his own. In that moment, Maya knew. Miles was here, and he was going to stay. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be perfect. But he was trying, and that meant everything. As the day ended, Miles and Maya walked away from the park together, the triplets running ahead, their laughter echoing in the distance. There was still so much to figure out. There were still unanswered questions, lingering, fears, and a whole new life to navigate. But for the first time, Maya felt a sense of peace. She wasn't alone in this anymore. Miles, too, was beginning to understand something profound. He had spent so much of his life thinking that power, control, and success were the keys to happiness. But now, he realized that it was about something much simpler, being there for the people who mattered most. His empire, his fortune, all of it paled in comparison to what he was beginning to build with Maya and her children. The road ahead wouldn't be without its challenges. There would be moments of doubt, moments where they would question whether they were doing the right thing. But as they walked into the future together, one step at a time, they knew that this unexpected, messy, beautiful journey was what truly mattered. And so as the sun set behind them, casting a warm glow over their small family, both Maya and Miles found themselves at a crossroads. They had been given a second chance at something they had never expected, something that had the power to change their lives forever. Together, they were building a new kind of legacy, not one of money and business, but of love, responsibility, and growth. In the end, it wasn't the birth certificate or the billion-dollar empire that defined who they were. It was the choices they made, the risks they took, and the way they chose to step into the unknown with courage, heart, and an open mind. And as they looked toward the future, one thing was certain: they were ready to face it together.